Pilot refuses to greet black woman boarding private jet immediately fired when her husband intervenes. Sometimes, true power doesn't come from loud words or forceful demands, but from silence, patience, and knowing the right moment to act. On a chilly, quiet tarmac, a pilot believed his position gave him authority, but his arrogance led to a critical misstep. When he refused to acknowledge a black woman boarding a private jet, he had no idea who she truly was or how her quiet strength would turn his career upside down in an unexpected and unforgettable way. But how did it escalate? What exactly pushed the situation to its breaking point? And what lesson did this pilot learn the hard way about underestimating others? As we unravel this story, you'll see how patience, dignity, and power can quietly reshape the narrative, leaving those who act out of arrogance to face the consequences of their own actions. Before we dive in, if you love stories of resilience, justice, and unexpected twists, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales. Your support helps us bring these incredible stories to even more people. Now, let's step onto that tarmac and witness how one small act of disrespect became the catalyst for a life-altering moment. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting the private airfield in hues of amber and violet. The quiet hum of jet engines punctuated the stillness, while the faint clatter of ground crew preparing for takeoff added an industrious undertone. On the runway sat a sleek, silver private jet, its polished surface gleaming under the fading light. Everything about the scene exuded exclusivity and quiet opulence. At the base of the jet's stairs stood Captain Richard Hayes, a seasoned pilot known for his precision in the cockpit but equally infamous for his arrogance on the ground. His posture was stiff, chin tilted slightly upward, as if the world owed him recognition. Behind his icy blue eyes was a man who believed he could size up anyone in an instant. His disdain for new money was no secret, and he often boasted that he could spot it from a mile away. For Richard, this flight was just another opportunity to revel in the illusion of control. Late, he muttered under his breath, watching the horizon. His lips curled into a faint sneer. Typical. His attitude changed little as a sleek black sedan rolled onto the tarmac. From it emerged Ava Morgan, a striking woman whose aura was one of quiet strength. Dressed in a tailored navy coat, her polished appearance spoke volumes without saying a word. She didn't need to announce her status, it was evident in every graceful step. Ava's assistant, a petite woman named Clara, followed closely, juggling a designer suitcase and a leather portfolio. As Ava approached the jet, the rhythmic click of her heels echoed against the quiet tarmac. Captain Hayes barely glanced at her, his eyes narrowing slightly as he made his silent judgment. Her type, he thought bitterly, though he dared not speak the words aloud. To him, she was just another passenger who didn't belong in his world. Ava, however, noticed everything: the stiffness in his posture, the way he refused to meet her gaze, the dismissiveness in his demeanor. Years of navigating boardrooms and high society events had taught her to read people like an open book. But instead of reacting, she responded with a calm, poised smile. "Good evening, Captain," she said warmly, her voice even and composed. Hayes didn't respond. He simply turned, retreating into the cockpit with an air of superiority. Ava blinked, smoothing her expression as Clara whispered nervously, "Did you see that?" Ava replied softly, "I did." No need to address it just yet. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had dealt with such moments before, someone who knew the storm would pass, but only after it revealed the truth of the person creating it. The contrast was stark: Captain Hayes' arrogance against Ava's quiet confidence. And while the tension was subtle, it hung in the air like a storm cloud waiting to break. As Ava Morgan ascended the stairs of the private jet, she maintained her calm and poised demeanor, despite the blatant slight from Captain Richard Hayes. His refusal to acknowledge her presence wasn't new to her; she had encountered such moments of dismissal before. But what Hayes didn't know was that Ava was someone who never wasted energy on confrontations that didn't deserve her time. Instead, she offered a faint smile to the cabin crew waiting at the entrance, whose uneasy glances revealed their awareness of the tension. "Good evening, Mrs. Morgan," one of the attendants greeted, her tone overly polite, as if compensating for the captain's behavior. "Good evening," Ava replied warmly, her voice carrying a quiet authority. She stepped inside the luxurious cabin, every move deliberate and graceful. Behind her, Clara followed, struggling to mask her frustration. The cabin crew exchanged nervous looks as the passengers settled in. They were used to catering to the wealthy and powerful, but Captain Hayes's behavior wasn't standard protocol. The tension was palpable, hanging in the air like a heavy mist. Ava took her seat, crossing her legs elegantly as she gazed out the window. The pristine white leather seats, polished wood accents, and soft ambient lighting of the cabin exuded luxury, but the atmosphere felt strained. Clara, seated across from Ava, fidgeted with her tablet. Her irritation was apparent as she muttered, "Unbelievable. Who does he think he is?" Ava turned her head slightly, her expression calm. "Clara, let it be for now. Patience." But he didn't even. Clara began, only to stop at Ava's raised hand, a silent but firm gesture that said everything. In the cockpit, Captain Hayes seethed. From the small cabin camera feed, he could see Ava seated in quiet composure, her assistant fuming across from her. Her calmness, more than anything, irritated him. She wasn't reacting, wasn't flustered, and that unsettled him. "She thinks she's above it all," he muttered under his breath, his fingers tightening on the yoke. His young co-pilot, Mark, glanced at him warily but said nothing. Hayes reached for the intercom, his voice flat and clipped as it echoed through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be departing shortly. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. For your safety, the cabin crew will address any requests." The tone was professional on the surface, but Ava recognized the undertone of condescension. Clara's jaw tightened as she turned to Ava. "Did you hear that? He's doing this on purpose." Ava, unbothered, took a sip of her sparkling water, setting the glass down with deliberate care. "He's unraveling," she said softly, more to herself than to Clara. In the cockpit, Hayes's resentment simmered. These people, he thought, his mind racing with judgment. They think they can just walk in, flash their money, and own the place. His assumptions about Ava blinded him to the truth. Her wealth and status weren't inherited or flaunted. She had built her success alongside her husband, with hard work and perseverance. But Hayes didn't care to know that. Mark, sensing Hayes's growing frustration, spoke cautiously. "Sir, maybe we should just focus on the flight." Hayes shot him a glare. "Focus on your instruments, Mark. Let me handle this." Mark said nothing, but his unease was clear. Hayes's fixation on Ava was escalating, and it was beginning to feel personal. Back in the cabin, Ava continued to wait. Her years of experience in high-pressure boardrooms had taught her that silence and patience often spoke louder than words. Confrontation wasn't necessary when people like Hayes always revealed themselves eventually. Clara, on the other hand, was fuming. "Mrs. Morgan, this isn't right. You shouldn't have to deal with this. Do you want me to report it when we land?" Ava smiled faintly, her gaze still fixed out the window. "Not yet, Clara. People like him always overstep. We'll let him show his true colors first." "But he's being so disrespectful," Clara protested. "Yes," Ava said calmly. "And everyone is noticing. The cabin crew, the co-pilot, they're all aware. He's doing this to himself." Hayes made another passive-aggressive announcement over the intercom, his tone colder this time. Clara's fists clenched, and even the cabin crew hesitated in their tasks, visibly uncomfortable. Ava, however, remained serene, her composure unshaken. Her calmness only deepened Hayes's frustration. From the cockpit, he watched the camera feed, his anger growing with every passing moment. "Why isn't she reacting?" he muttered. "They always react." Mark finally spoke up. "Sir, I think we should just focus on getting this flight done smoothly. No need to stir things up." Hayes didn't respond. Instead, he leaned back in his seat, stewing in his own bitterness. In the cabin, Ava turned to Clara, her voice gentle but firm. "Patience isn't about weakness, Clara. It's about strength. Let him continue. He'll hang himself soon enough." Clara stared at her boss, frustration giving way to admiration. Ava wasn't just enduring the situation, she was controlling it with quiet precision. The tension in the air was thick, but Ava's quiet confidence stood in stark contrast to Hayes's spiraling arrogance. It was only a matter of time before the storm broke. Captain Richard Hayes sat in the cockpit, his knuckles white as they gripped the control yoke. His eyes flicked between the instruments and the small camera feed showing the cabin behind him. There she was, Ava Morgan, seated with unshakable calm. Her assistant was visibly frustrated, fidgeting and muttering under her breath, but Ava remained still, composed, and completely unbothered. It infuriated him. "Who does she think she is?" Hayes muttered under his breath, though the cockpit was silent save for the hum of the engines. "Walking in here like she owns the place, acting like nothing bothers her." His co-pilot, Ethan, glanced at him nervously. "Sir, I think you're overthinking this. She hasn't even said anything to you." Hayes snapped his head toward Ethan, his icy glare cutting through the younger man. "You don't understand, do you? It's not what she's saying, it's how she's sitting there, like she's untouchable. These people ... they come in with their money and think they can buy respect." Ethan hesitated, unsure how to respond. He had flown with Hayes long enough to know his captain had a tendency to let his ego run unchecked. But this felt different. More personal. "Sir, maybe we should just focus on the flight," Ethan said cautiously, trying to defuse the situation. Hayes ignored him, his gaze locked on the camera feed. Ava's calmness was like a mirror, reflecting his own insecurities back at him, and the more composed she remained, the more he felt himself unraveling. As the jet cruised smoothly through the air, Hayes's irritation festered. He had expected Ava to react by now, to challenge him, confront him, give him some reason to feel justified in his disdain. But her quiet dignity was like sandpaper against his ego, wearing him down with every second she didn't acknowledge his behavior. "I'm going to deal with this," Hayes muttered suddenly, unbuckling his harness. Ethan blinked in alarm. "Sir, what are you doing?" Hayes stood, straightening his jacket with jerky movements. "I'm going back there. Let's see how calm she is when she has to talk to me face to face." "Captain, I really don't think that's a good idea," Ethan said, his tone pleading. "Stay here and do your job," Hayes snapped, brushing past him. Ethan watched helplessly as Hayes left the cockpit, his heart sinking. Something about this felt like a line was about to be crossed, one they couldn't come back from. In the cabin, Ava noticed Hayes the moment he stepped through the cockpit door. She didn't flinch, didn't adjust her posture. Instead, she remained exactly as she was, poised and unshaken. Her assistant, Clara, stiffened visibly, her eyes narrowing as the captain approached. Hayes stopped a few feet from Ava, his posture rigid, his jaw tight. For a long moment he said nothing, his presence looming over the serene atmosphere of the cabin. Finally, Ava looked up, meeting his gaze with an expression of quiet curiosity. Her calm composure only deepened the contrast between them. "Is there something I can help you with, Captain Hayes?" she asked, her voice smooth and measured. The words hit Hayes like a slap. Her tone wasn't confrontational, it was polite, almost too polite, but it carried an undertone of quiet power. "I just wanted to make sure everything is to your satisfaction," Hayes said, his voice tight and forced. Ava tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. "Everything is quite satisfactory, thank you." Her response, simple and direct, left no room for him to push further. It was as if she had deflected his attempt to provoke her with nothing more than a mirror, reflecting his own insecurities back at him. Clara, seated across from Ava, struggled to hide her smirk. She could see Hayes was floundering, his confidence crumbling under Ava's calm scrutiny. Hayes opened his mouth as if to say something else, but the words faltered. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. Without another word, he turned sharply on his heel and strode back toward the cockpit, his footsteps echoing louder than necessary in the quiet cabin. Ethan looked up as Hayes returned, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. The captain slammed the cockpit door behind him, gripping the back of his seat as if trying to anchor himself. "Everything okay, sir?" Ethan asked cautiously, though the tension in the air told him the answer. "She's impossible," Hayes snapped, his voice shaking. "Sitting there like she's better than everyone else. Acting like she owns the damn plane." Ethan didn't respond. He had seen the look on Hayes' face as he returned to the cockpit, a man whose confidence had been chipped away, one calm response at a time. Back in the cabin, Clara leaned closer to Ava, her voice low. "That was incredible. You didn't even have to raise your voice." Ava smiled faintly, taking a sip of her sparkling water. "People like him always reveal themselves, Clara. You just have to give them time." But he's losing it, Clara whispered. What if he? Ava's expression softened, but her voice remained steady. He won't. Not yet. He's still trying to prove something. But don't worry, this will end exactly as it's meant to. The jet continued to glide through the night sky, but the tension was palpable. Hayes's fragile ego had been cracked, and everyone in the cabin could feel it. It was only a matter of time before the inevitable breaking point arrived. Back in the cockpit, Captain Richard Hayes sat rigidly in his seat, staring at the instruments with a hollow intensity. His jaw clenched as his thoughts churned, replaying the earlier interaction with Ava Morgan. Her composed demeanor haunted him. Every calm word she had spoken felt like a deliberate act of defiance, though she had done nothing overtly challenging. A soft chime broke the tense silence in the cockpit. Hayes glanced at the console and froze. A message blinked on the screen in bold, glowing text: incoming message from Morgan Enterprises. His stomach dropped. Morgan Enterprises. Ava's last name. The realization hit him like a blow to the chest. She wasn't just a wealthy passenger, she was someone important, someone with power far beyond what he had assumed. His arrogance had blinded him to the possibility that he wasn't in control of the situation. Ethan, the young co-pilot, noticed the change in Hayes's expression. Sir, what's the message? Hayes's throat tightened. He didn't answer. Instead, he read the next line, which sealed his fate. Owner requests immediate debrief upon landing. Prepare for reassignment review. Reassignment review. He knew what that meant. His career, his carefully constructed identity as a seasoned, untouchable pilot was about to come crashing down. Hayes tried to steady his breathing, gripping the yoke as if it could anchor him. He muttered under his breath, "They wouldn't dare fire me. I've been doing this for years." Ethan glanced at him, his unease growing. "Captain, are you all right? You seem distracted." "I'm fine," Hayes snapped, his voice sharper than he intended. But the strain in his tone betrayed him. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. He had flown with Hayes for a while, but he'd never seen him like this, so visibly shaken, so consumed by something outside the cockpit. The intercom button blinked softly, waiting for an announcement. Hayes's hand hovered over it, trembling. He needed to reassert control, to remind everyone on board who was in charge. But when he finally pressed the button, his voice came out uneven, lacking its usual authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be preparing for landing shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and remain seated for the duration of the descent." In the cabin, Ava Morgan heard the announcement. She exchanged a knowing glance with Clara, who raised an eyebrow. "That didn't sound confident," Clara muttered. Ava smiled faintly. "No, it didn't." Hayes turned off the intercom and leaned back in his seat, wiping his damp palms on his uniform. His mind raced with excuses, strategies, anything that might salvage the situation. "It's just a misunderstanding," he muttered to himself. "I'll explain. She's overreacting. They'll listen to me." Ethan heard the words and couldn't stay silent any longer. "Sir, maybe we should just focus on the landing and let the ground team handle this. You don't want to make things worse." Hayes snapped his head toward Ethan, his glare icy. "Worse? You think I've done something wrong?" Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I think the best course of action right now is to stay professional. That's all." Hayes scoffed. "Professional? She's the one making a scene by sitting there like she owns the place." Ethan's eyes widened. "Sir, she hasn't said anything to you." This is he paused, unsure how to finish the sentence without escalating things further. "This is my jet," Hayes interrupted, his voice rising. "I'm the captain. I'm in charge." Ethan leaned back, a pit of dread forming in his stomach. Hayes wasn't just rattled, he was unraveling. The tension in the cockpit spilled over into the cabin as the jet began its descent. The cabin crew moved with practiced efficiency, but their movements were stiff, their faces tight with unease. Clara noticed it immediately. "They're nervous," she whispered to Ava. "They know," Ava replied softly. Hayes's voice crackled over the intercom again, this time shakier. "We'll be landing in approximately 15 minutes. Please remain seated until the aircraft has come to a complete stop." The crew exchanged glances. Clara frowned. He's cracking. Ava remained calm, her gaze fixed out the window. The city lights below twinkled like scattered diamonds, their glow a stark contrast to the tension inside the jet. The cabin crew leader approached Ava cautiously. "Mrs. Morgan, is everything all right? Can I get you anything?" Ava offered a reassuring smile. "No, thank you. Everything is fine." Her calm demeanor rippled through the room, steadying the nerves of those around her. Even Clara relaxed slightly, though her frustration lingered. As the jet approached the runway, Hayes's breathing quickened. He tightened his grip on the controls, as if executing a perfect landing would somehow undo the damage already done. Ethan monitored the instruments closely, his tension palpable. "Captain, we're lined up for landing. Systems are stable." "I know," Hayes snapped, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. The jet touched down smoothly, the tires screeching briefly against the runway before settling into a steady glide. Inside the cabin, the passengers and crew felt the familiar jolt of landing. Ava unbuckled her seatbelt with deliberate care. Clara glanced at her nervously. "Do you think he knows what's coming?" Ava's faint smile returned. "He knows." Outside, the sleek black SUVs of Morgan Enterprises pulled up to the jet. Their headlights cut through the misty night, their presence sharp and unyielding. Ava's patience had paid off. The real moment of reckoning was about to begin. In the cockpit, Hayes stared out at the approaching vehicles, his face pale and his hands trembling. Ethan broke the silence, his voice low and cautious. "Sir, I think you should prepare to face them." Hayes didn't respond. He knew his fate was sealed, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The storm he had created was here, and it was about to consume him. The private jet came to a smooth stop on the runway, but inside the cabin, the atmosphere was anything but calm. Outside, the glow of black CVs pierced the misty darkness, their headlights cutting sharply through the night. The vehicles lined up neatly at the edge of the tarmac, their presence commanding and deliberate. As the engines wound down, the cabin crew moved swiftly to prepare for disembarkation. The lead attendant glanced nervously toward the cockpit, where Captain Richard Hayes remained seated, his hands gripping the armrests tightly. In the cabin, Ava Morgan stood gracefully, adjusting the lapels of her tailored coat. She looked out the window at the approaching team, her expression composed and resolute. Her assistant, Clara, fidgeted beside her, unable to suppress her unease. "They're here," Clara whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Ava's gaze didn't waver. "Yes, they are." The cabin door opened with a faint hiss, and the sound of polished shoes echoed against the metal stairs as David Carter, Ava's husband, stepped aboard the jet. He moved with quiet authority, his tailored suit perfectly in place, and his dark eyes scanning the cabin with measured precision. Behind him, a small team of assistants and security followed, their expressions neutral but sharp. "Good evening," David said, his tone warm yet formal as he greeted his wife. He leaned in to kiss her cheek before turning his attention to the cockpit door. The silence was palpable as Captain Hayes emerged, his posture stiff and his face pale. He approached cautiously, his earlier arrogance now replaced with visible discomfort. "Mr. Carter," Hayes began, his voice strained, "there seems to be some kind of misunderstanding. I can assure you." David raised a hand, silencing him without raising his voice. His calm authority filled the cabin. "Captain Hayes, there is no misunderstanding. My team has already reviewed the incident in full audio recordings, crew statements, and your behavior throughout the flight. It's unacceptable." Hayes stammered, his desperation evident. "Sir, she didn't say anything. If there was an issue, I should have been informed before." David's gaze hardened. "This isn't about her saying anything, Captain. It's about your conduct, your blatant disrespect, condescension, and unprofessionalism. That behavior has no place in this company or any company under my name." Hayes's mouth opened, but no words came out. His shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. "You will no longer fly for this company," David said firmly, his voice carrying finality. "You are to pack your belongings and leave this aircraft immediately. My team will ensure your swift departure from the premises." For a moment, Hayes stood frozen, his chest rising and falling as he processed the words. He glanced around the cabin, searching for sympathy, but found none. The crew avoided his gaze. Clara glared at him, and Ava remained seated, calm and composed, her expression unreadable. Realizing there was nothing left to say, Hayes turned and walked toward the door, his steps heavy and slow. 2 members of David's security detail flanked him, ensuring he exited without incident. As Hayes descended the stairs, the faint sound of his footsteps on the tarmac seemed to echo the fall of his career. From her seat by the window, Ava watched him go, her calm exterior never faltering. Clara exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. That's it, then. Ava stood, gathering her belongings with quiet grace. It's been over since the beginning, she said softly. David turned to his wife, his stern expression softening. Shall we? Ava slipped her arm into his, her poised demeanor unwavering. Together they exited the jet, leaving the memory of Captain Richard Hayes behind, a lesson in how arrogance always meets its reckoning. Ava and David Carter descended the steps of the private jet with the same calm composure that had defined their actions throughout the ordeal. The black CVs awaited them, their doors held open by assistants who greeted them with quiet professionalism. Ava stepped into the car with graceful ease, her demeanor unshaken, while David followed, his presence commanding but understated. For everyone watching, their exit symbolized more than just the end of the flight. It was a testament to the power of dignity and restraint, qualities that spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. Ava hadn't needed to raise her voice or engage in petty exchanges. Her silence and patience had done all the work, allowing Richard Hayes' arrogance to become his undoing. This story carries a timeless lesson: true power doesn't come from loud declarations or aggressive actions. It lies in the ability to remain composed under pressure, to wait for the right moment, and to let others' actions speak for themselves. Ava didn't need to assert her authority; her poise and quiet confidence did it for her. In contrast, Hayes' arrogance and prejudice led him to self-destruction. His inability to see past his own ego blinded him to the consequences of his actions. Ultimately, it wasn't anyone else who brought him down, it was his own choices. As the Carters' SUVs disappeared into the night, one truth lingered: never underestimate the quiet ones. Their silence often holds the loudest lessons, and their patience paves the way for justice to unfold in its own time. If you enjoyed this story and its powerful message, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of resilience, dignity, and unexpected reckonings. Let this be a reminder that strength is often found in the quietest moments. What a powerful story of resilience and justice. Captain Richard Hayes believed his arrogance and prejudice would go unchecked, but Ava Morgan's quiet strength and unwavering composure turned the tables in a way he never anticipated. With patience and dignity, Ava let Hayes reveal his true self. And when the moment came, the consequences were swift and decisive. What do you think about the captain's behavior? Was his downfall inevitable, or could he have salvaged his career with a different approach? And what about Ava's response? Do you think her patience was the right move, or would you have handled it differently? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you found this story as impactful as we did, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales of resilience, justice, and unexpected twists. By subscribing and clicking the notification bell, you'll never miss another story that inspires and reminds us of the power of character and composure. Thank you so much for watching. We appreciate your support and your time. Stay tuned for our next story. It's one you won't want to miss. A chance encounter, a life-altering decision, and an act of kindness that changes everything. We'll see you soon. Until next time, remember, true strength often lies in patience, and justice always finds its way.